Executive committee had a demo of one of his, mainly a translation.
I don't think this is on.
Yeah, I
I
think
think it's red.
there's something about how the Manhattan president has to approve an AI note-taking tool. I remembered, I don't know where that.
Well, I think proofreader, because in.
Is Noemi still here?
Yeah, I think she's like shuffling in the kitchen.
Yeah, I don't know if this is on
Red
properly.
is not a good, well, let me push no, that's the.
Yeah, I think it should turn green right now. It says,
Not green.
I think, okay, I think
So-
we're good then.
it's unmuted on the laptop, but I don't think it's on here.
I think it is.
Doesn't it turn green?
Do you want me to, once it's unmuted on both. Do you want me to check if I could hear it on my
Yes.
phone?
Yes, because I've unmuted it on the laptop.
Once you unmute it on one, it should.
Okay, so I'm just checking to see if you can hear anything that's being said through the system. Let me know when you're logged in.
Hello, Vivian.
Hey, haven't seen you in a while.
Heidi.
Oh, I should have thought of that.
Oh. Okay, so, but that's the recording.
No, this is live. It's just a lag.
Okay, so, but you can hear.
This is what everybody's hearing, right?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Let me see, who do we have? I see it.
This is what everybody's hearing.
Oh, Indiana. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Indiana.
I can't hear her.
That's because she is not,
It's muted.
Did everyone introduce themselves?
we have not yet begun.
I see all these wondrous new faces.
Once you mute one or mute, once you mute or unmute, it'll be on both because that's set up as the only microphone.
Okay. Now let me see if I can change this. Well, I guess I can't.
What are you trying to do?
I just try to make Indiana a panelist.
You should be able to do that.
I know I should, I just don't.
But not from the chat. You should
Well, no.
Exit out of the chat and then,
Participants
alright,
and attendees.
there you go.
There she is.
It is on. Oh, the eyes lit up. Look.
There's just I'll bring
Hey.
Thank you, Wayne.
Hello
So
all.
we're back, right? We're back. Come on. Where's the enthusiasm? Hey,
So, thank you so much. So it is 7:05. I would like to call the meeting to order. Welcome and welcome back to the regularly scheduled meetings of community boards. I'm Wayne Benjamin. I chair Land Use for Manhattan Community Board 12. I'd like to begin by having my fellow committee members introduce themselves. And then we have we have 3 new members. I want to give them an opportunity to speak in more detail, but right now, just introduce yourself, starting at my left. You're
Oh,
my
I'm
immediate
new,
left.
I didn't know you,
Yeah,
okay.
but then I'll come back to you for
Okay.
more details.
Okay, Melissa Driscoll Sims.
Eitan Steinbeck.
Presenter today, Charlotte Fidel.
Daniel Bonilla.
I'm Heidi Guzman.
Vivian Duquette.
Ann Megas.
Jim Berlin.
Thank you. And also online, we have Indiana. Why don't you introduce yourself? Because I understand you will be back on the committee.
Yes. Hi, all. Indiana Porta, and I am on this committee and on Housing and Human Services. It was just like being an oversight. So I'm really excited to be back with all of you.
Okay. And I think Catherine will either have to add another person or take away a person, because that would make, with you, that'll make 10, and we always have uneven numbers. But we'll deal with that later. So as I mentioned, we have 3 new members of Community Board 12 and 3 new members of the Land Use Committee. So they had, a quick second to introduce themselves, so why don't each of you, say a little bit more about, I guess, A, your interest in being on the community board, your interest in land use, and maybe where in the community, you live, so we get a sense of, how we are representing the community geographically. Once again, starting with that.
Okay, like I said before, I'm Melissa Driscoll Sims. I just joined the community board this year. I live in Inwood and I've lived here for about 6 years now. And I'm an attorney. That's my day job. I'm an attorney.
A land use
And-
attorney by any chance?
No, unfortunately not. I do civil litigation and primarily insurance coverage work. So I represent insurance companies mostly, and companies in contract disputes. When I moved here about 6 years ago into Inwood, I just thought it was really interesting seeing the neighborhood change, and I had heard about all of the litigation part of the rezoning of Inwood. So it kind of piqued my interest in land use. And recently, in the last few years, just seeing it like come to life and seeing what's happening in Inwood, and even just in the surrounding blocks from where I live. So I thought it would be a really great way to get involved on the land use committee, but just generally, like seeing how things work and trying to make a difference, I thought it would be great to be part of CB12.
I am Eitan Steinbaum. I am a law student at Cardozo School of Law. I will be doing bankruptcy after law school. And I first came to Washington Heights a few years ago for Yeshiva University. I did a graduate degree there before going to Cardozo. So now I have a little bit of a commute downtown, but it's not so bad. And I'm interested in serving in CB12 because I think, have people from the Orthodox Jewish community in the Heights is important, and to build bridges in the community is also important, and land use specifically. When I between undergraduate and law school, I worked in some assembly offices, so I got a chance to see a lot of the housing and land use issues that come up there, so that really interested me in it, and I thought it was a really good place to be able to help communities, and especially the one I live in. So thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I'm Ann Megas, and I've lived in Washington Heights for 20 years, always in River Arts. The building with 2 lanes shut down in front of it for 4 years, but we won't go there
That's
right
another
now.
committee meeting.
That's another committee.
Traffic and transportation.
Yeah, exactly.
That's on Monday.
Yep, we tried that. I started to understand a little bit more about how the community board worked in city government in New York, and it was intriguing to me, especially in this kind of political environment where I felt pretty powerless on a national, global level. And I thought, you know what, let me just get down and dirty and see if I can serve my neighborhood, and doing some things in my building. I have a 25-year career in commercial real estate lending, lots of different aspects of commercial real estate lending, construction lending, workouts, CMBS, and I thought, well, let's try land use. I think you might know the language, and so I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Are you also in business development by any chance?
No.
I think someone with your background would be useful for business development, but that's a. So, I shared with everyone, but also in particular for our new members, a number of resolutions, but actually shared with Charlotte, just so that the Municipal Art Society had a sense of some of the resolutions that the committee has passed and the full board adopted related to historic designation and equity and inclusion in that. But I also wanted to share it with the new members and refresh the memories of existing members so that they know some of the things we've been discussing over the years. For land use, and I was only half joking about, are you a land use attorney, because we deal with zoning and various aspects that are technical and there are legal. And while, as an architect, I'm familiar with many of the terms. While the committee need not be expert in it, they need to be, informed and comfortable enough with the things that we'll be handling. And so there are some documents that I will share that have proven to be useful to me and to others in the past. One of which is a zoning handbook, and I'm told that even experienced licensed professionals find the zoning handbook useful because the zoning resolution is thousands of pages long and so contradictory. So this reduces something, kind of explains what some of that is supposed to mean, and it will take us through definitions of, the different types of zoning and different types of actions. Because when a land use matter comes before us, if they're talking about like rezoning in Inwood, or if there's a special permit for something, or if something's proposed for a historic designation, or there are in some cases, revocable consents that are partially our responsibility and partially traffic and transportation, it'll come, through us. So I will send that. The Borough President's Office also over the years have done sort of a land use 101 and then maybe a land use, 102. I have the PowerPoint presentations from years ago, although it may have Scott Sterner's name on it or part, but the information hasn't changed. So I will also share that with you so you have a sense of what the background of zoning in New York City, how it has changed, and what some of the critical aspects of zoning are, and how zoning interacts with just about everything that gets built. And as I mentioned, I think during the orientation, the zoning dictates what can be built where, how big, how tall. So that's something that, as we talk about community character, is something that is part of the language, that we need to be comfortable with. Once we don't need to be experts, but we do need to be, comfortable with that discussion. And I also say that because in many instances, as we are discussing projects, either with the people who are presenting that or with our fellow residents, the information that comes to us may or may not be accurate in terms of, what quote unquote the law says in terms of zoning or what is permitted under certain categories. So we need to be able to say, yes, this is true, or no, that is not true, or to ask, can something be done or can something be modified, or are there provisions that will allow for it? Because in many instances, it's not a hard and fast, we like it, we don't like it, we support it, we don't support it, but it's like, there are aspects of it that work and aspects that do not. And, if we are going to, try to see if something is workable, I guess we need to know where to ask and where we can, massage. So I will share those with you. And if there are questions, please feel free to email me, and I'm pretty certain that we will all be getting emails from the Borough President's Office soon, because they do a series of mandatory trainings, and one of them is in fact the land use. But what I found last year and the year before, they don't go into as much detail as they did in the past. So it'll be useful for you. They don't. It'll be useful for you to have the reference information. Something that Marty Collins is a former chair of CB12, a former board member, very active. If you've ever heard of the Uptown Art Stroll, I remember, and Marty remembers, when the Uptown Art Stroll was brand new. But he asked when the October land use meeting will be held, and I said that's an agenda item, and it's an agenda item because land use meets the first Wednesday of the month, except, when there are, certain conflicts. And the first Wednesday of October is Yom Kippur. So we don't want to conflict with that. And so the question is, when do we want to move it? In years past, instead of meeting on the first Wednesday, we just shifted it to the second Wednesday, which would be October 8th. But the question is, does that work for everyone?
My other committee meets on the second Wednesday.
Okay.
I'm ready.
I'm okay with the 8th, but I'm open to,
Yeah, we need at least a quorum, but.
Do the 8th.
I can do the 8th. I will be a little bit late though, because there's another Jewish holiday that ends at dusk on the 8th, Sukkot.
It's not on my calendar.
It's fun. So I think it ends at 7:07, so I could be here like 10 minutes after that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I suggest that we try to pick a day where everyone can attend, like, it doesn't have to be a Wednesday.
And what date would that be? Actually, who has the? I don't have the October calendar.
Noemi probably has a copy.
Do you have an October calendar or a standard calendar?
They don't make next month's calendar until the executive.
Right, but do you have like this month's calendar?
I would do it if you want.
I was gonna say,
Okay.
it opens it,
Yeah, I just want to see when the committees regularly meet.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's gonna reflect that because there's a holiday this month, but on the back of the palm card it says what day.
It's on the website, what days
I could tell you any days of the week. On the back of.
It has it laid out there.
Okay, so if we have one
Except youth is Thursday now, they changed.
yeah, they show it on this calendar for Thursday. If we have one conflict on the 8th, are there any conflicts on the 7th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is when it begins.
The holiday, that holiday is 2 days.
Okay, so it begins at sunset on the
6th, and then goes to the,
6th.
yeah, so it goes,
It's like a 2-day?
it's like sunset on the 6th through sundown, through sunset on the 8th, basically.
Okay.
So Thursday.
And Thursday, the 9th,
Yeah, I could do that.
Look at that.
I think I'd have to do it by Zoom.
That's
The
okay.
ninth youth and education meets and. Yeah. And aging committee, but they.
well, the aging committee's in the morning.
It's morning.
It's just youth and education, not that, sorry.
Are you on that?
I'm just, no.
No, I'm just,
reading, yeah.
no, we've got that. So it looks like we may be able to do it on the 9th? Okay,
Very good.
I can't do the 9th, I'm sorry,
Oh.
I'm just looking, I can't do the 9th.
and we typically don't meet on Fridays.
I can't do
And what about Mondays? Or
It's
is that-
Columbus Day.
Oh, Columbus Day.
The
Tina
sixth.
comes to these meetings.
No, the
It's on the
12th, I mean, the
Yeah, that's the
13th, yeah.
13th.
Can we meet on the 30th? Is that legal?
The 30th of what?
No.
No, that,
It's
it
gotta
wouldn't
be
be
in
an
the right
October
month.
meeting.
I don't know, I'm just asking. I'm just asking. It's like the last day of September.
Just before.
Yeah, but that's not an October meeting.
Okay. I'm.
Right.
We could stay like.
Well,
I'm just
actually,
asking, yeah.
Well, if we met at midnight,
Cause it's past the general meeting for,
it's not an October meeting.
fair enough.
And the other complication is we've been talking since the beginning of the year about the Inwood rezoning update from EDC, and we received some information, and we said that in September initially, we were going to have a more general one, but summer being what it is, there was not a lot of coordination between the office and EDC, so it's now being pushed to October, which is fine because it gives some time for planning, but also now Carmen De La Rosa would like to be there and working in, her calendar, so it might be an agenda item and perhaps the only agenda item for the October land use meeting, or it might be a separate meeting, and it wasn't clear to me, Heidi, I know you were on the emails,
Yeah.
what, if there was a preference for one or the other, but if we're trying to do it like in some place like a school or whatever, apparently it does not work during the week and would have to be a weekend.
Right.
And if we're doing it, like as a regularly scheduled or now adjusted committee meeting, Catherine's suggestion is that we do it here on the second floor because we know we can control the space and get all the technology right.
Yeah. We were floating around days. My instinct is that counterintuitively, I think a weeknight would have higher attendance. Because I feel like on weekends, especially in the fall and with holidays
Yeah.
in October, I feel like people might be out of town or whatever, and I do think that there's maybe more inertia to attendance on a weeknight. And rolling it into the meeting day, I think also benefits that. But wait, I don't know if you had any thoughts or if anyone else had any.
Yeah.
I agree that it should not be on a weekend.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that being the case, I think
And if you can't find an alternative to the
Yeah,
ninth, then we'll use the
I
ninth.
I don't, thus far, we're losing at least one person on one of the two
Yeah.
nights. But on the other hand, I would say we could do that tentatively and see what works for Carmen's schedule, because if Carmen, has some other date, then maybe we just move the land use committee meeting for that month to whatever date works for her.
Yeah.
But at this juncture, we're saying the 9th?
Yeah.
Possibly, but the 8th, you'd be
I can add, yeah.
10 minutes late.
No, the 9th is the Thursday?
Thursday,
Yeah, that should be good
okay,
for me.
and that's a tentative.
And we'll have you show up once.
I'll see if I can move around
What?
what I
We'll
have.
show up once the sun.
And just for clarity, we voted, CB12, to have hybrid meetings. So for hybrid meetings, you can still participate via Zoom, but the quorum must be in person. So if one person, can't make it, or two people, that's fine, as long as, if we have a committee of 9, as long as 5 people are here in person, then we are good.
And if you have a certain kind of disability, then you can stay home.
Yes, and if you have a certified disability it's that's laid out, that means you can participate by Zoom and you count towards quorum. Otherwise, the quorum has to be in person. Once quorum is established, the committee members who are on Zoom can participate regularly, they can vote, but they don't count towards establishing quorum. That has to be in person.
So we're scheduling for the 9th.
We're tentatively scheduled for the 9th, and we'll coordinate with Councilwoman De La Rosa's office to see if that works for her.
And it would be in the meeting room if we.
Yeah, that'd probably be, because that can accommodate more people than even the meeting room here.
So second floor.
Second floor,
Yeah.
The ninth.
yes. So, can't see you. Why don't you move over?
If you would generate a flyer, if you would, bilingual flyer for that meeting, when it is finally confirmed, I'll be happy to post it in the rezoning area, 10th Avenue, 207 to Academy Street, so people in the area, including the apartment buildings that have been there for years, know and invite them to join you either virtually or in person.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have what time is it? We're a little early, but we're a little, because I think we're expecting someone else coming as well.
Yeah, she just texted me that she's running late, so we might go ahead
Yeah.
and start her.
So in 2021, and this is, sort of in the wake of the, killing of George Floyd, a number of city agencies, put out statements on how they were working to address, equity and inclusion. The Landmarks Preservation Commission, was one of them. And in the statement that was issued on January 19th, 2021 by the chair, Sarah Carroll, and the executive director, Linda Krasavage, they point out how last year was challenging, and, they have policy goals working within, the Mayor de Blasio, addressing equity in every aspect of LPC's work. And this framework of equity and inclusion is established to ensure diversity and inclusion in designations, to make sure that we are telling the stories of all New Yorkers, to ensure effective outreach both for our regulatory work and in gathering support for designation, which requires the agency to acknowledge and work with the incredible diversity amongst New Yorkers in terms of language and culture, and to ensure fairness, transparency, and efficiency in regulations so that all property owners understand the agency's processes and have equal access to the resources, that proposed work is approved in a timely manner and property owners are supported through technical assistance and improved guidance. And this goes on for several pages, and I sent the document to everyone so you have it. But I mean, that was sort of the background, the context within which, this equity framework, was established. And just a little bit more, background, and this is something that's in, the Land Use 101, but New York City's preservation law was created in 1965, and that was created sort of in the wake of the destruction of Penn Station, which is a magnificent building designed by McKim, Means and White. But it's, in addition to being a magnificent building, if you look at all of the efforts that the state and various authorities are undertaking now to try to recreate a transportation hub to accommodate the kind of traffic that's there and not have what people refer to, the current state as sort of a maze of rat, tunnels, something that is, grander, more welcoming. And Moynihan Station, certainly if you arrive there, is more welcoming than when you arrived, sort of in the bowels underneath Madison Square Garden. But the destruction of that building is what prompted the city council to pass the preservation law. And in terms of what the law, is intended to do, it's to safeguard buildings and places that represent New York City's cultural, social, economic, political, and architectural history, not just architectural history. And it's to stabilize and improve property values, foster civic pride, protect and enhance the city's attractions to tourists, strengthen the economy of the city, and promote the use of historic districts, landmarks, interior landmarks, and city landmarks for the education, pleasure, and welfare of the people of the city. And I read that because in many of our discussions, we pointed out it seems that landmarks only focuses more heavily on architectural history and less so particularly on cultural and social.
And the state of the building right now.
Yeah, and so in the course of going through various emails this summer, I saw where the Municipal Art Society is looking at the LPC's landmark equity framework 4 years later to see how far we've come, what still has to, what still can be addressed. So I thought it would be interesting to see if we could pull them in to discuss that. I was able to, reach someone. The Municipal Art Society, of which I used to be a member, I have to renew my membership, is a, is a, a nonprofit that, deals with, various aspects of the urban environment. And the last time, I believe, we interfaced with them, we were looking at a study that it did that looked at downtown Brooklyn. And I mentioned that we often get, some requests for special permits. And through the Board of Standards and Appeals, one can apply for a permit to get relief from certain aspects of zoning. And the Board of Standards and Appeals, those permits are as old as the zoning regulation. And if there are attorneys in the room, it was created as a relief valve so that private property owners could not claim there was a taking of property. But if you look at downtown Brooklyn, what the Municipal Art Society study showed was that by the concentration of BSA special permits that were granted, downtown Brooklyn was effectively rezoned. So there was no formal rezoning, but every single exception, since it was in such a concentrated geographic area, it basically changed the zoning in the area. So we haven't been in touch with them for a while, so I thought it was a good opportunity to touch base again and to get a sense of how they are viewing LPC's equity framework. So with that, I would like to introduce Charlotte Bolander, is it?
Vinalji.
Well, you see, I took French in the 1960s. Really? And so it's been a while, so my apologies.
The language
Alright,
has
I'm used to
changed.
it.
My accent is gone.
I'm used to
Really?
it. Sometimes I say boulanger too. It's boulanger.
Boulanger.
Yes.
Merci.
In case you couldn't tell, English is not my first language, so I have a little script with me. Hopefully that's okay. Oh,
No,
No, I couldn't tell either.
no.
just a little bit of background.
Do you need the
Oh, the mouse. Yeah.
mouse?
Do you have the presentation up to
It is loaded.
Oh, okay.
Let me see, where is my,
And Director Carrie Butler is gonna be joining us as well later on, but she's on vacation.
Where is it loaded?
And
In the
this is-
background?
This is the deck.
This is the deck, yeah, it's
Okay.
already printed out, so
We'll save
have
that.
a look.
In the middle?
So we have.
No, on the, right.
It's one side.
And then,
Oh,
Oh, no, there are two.
Oh, actually.
oh, perfect.
then it's just gotta,
Is that There's many pages.
you can make that smaller, the green thing, that little arrow,
Wanna share?
Well, it'll be on the screen.
that's it, you did it.
Otherwise,
It's on
we'll
email,
see.
I'll just like find it here.
Alright.
Actually, I can just advance it for you.
Oh yeah, I'll just
It'll
say
be-
next, okay.
You wanna put it full screen?
Yeah.
You can probably right click and do that.
That's not what I wanna do.
No? Okay, so view. It's not.
Yeah, full screen.
Ah.
Are we ready?
We are ready.
Alright, well, good evening everyone, my name is Charlotte Boulanger, and I'm an Enduring Culture Research Fellow at the Municipal Art Society. Just a bit of background, this project was started when I was an intern at the Municipal Art Society. I started a year ago, and then I transferred to full-time a couple months ago, but this was my kind of internship capstone project at MAS. So it's kind of like my little baby too, so it's the first time that we're publicly talking about this, so this is really exciting. I will be speaking to some citywide findings because MAS is an organization that works citywide, but I tried my best to really tie it back to what CB12 could do and what has changed, what has not, and how the community can help move the conversation forward. Next. So just a quick overview of what we'll cover today. I'll start by explaining what the equity framework is, even though Wayne, you did already a really great job at introducing it. Then share a high-level view of our research findings across the city. Then from there on, I will zoom in on CB12 and look at the state of preservation and landmark designation with a focus on whether or not the equity framework has had any significant impacts that are quantifiable so far. No. Some of you I already know the answer, which is no. After that, I will discuss recommendations and opportunities. I will then close it off by highlighting some of MAS's broader advocacy work, our Enduring Culture Initiative, and our waterfront access research before offering some reflections about what lies ahead. Next. So about the equity framework, so as Wayne mentioned, it was introduced by LPC in January of 2021. I know that CB12 has been vocal, for example, in recent years to advocate for more inclusive preservation. I need to emphasize though that this is not a law. This is not a formal policy change by any means. This is a public commitment by the agency to making preservation more inclusive and accessible. And one of the main goals is, for example, to landmark sites that reflect cultural and social histories that have historically been overlooked, including those tied to communities of color, immigrant groups, and working class neighborhoods. So with this premise in mind, this is kind of where MAS came in and worked to assess some of the stated goals of the framework. The research was not meant to just be critical, we also wanted to see if there were any wins, identify any avenues for improvements, and most importantly, highlight advocacy avenues for MAS and for communities. And personally, I also saw it as a way to give data back to communities, because I think that's something that LPC does not do really well for advocacy. So there were three main phases to this work. First, we started looking at all the designations since 2014. There's a lot of designations. And we used that as a cutoff date because it marked the beginning of the de Blasio administration, so we wanted it to be a clean, fresh slate. Then we started delving into which stories were being told through these designations and see whether the introduction of the framework had any tangible impacts. And because the equity framework does not only focus on landmarking, we also looked at some of the digital storytelling tools. I don't know if you're familiar with them. LPC is releasing some storytelling maps that are digital or tours that you can access online. This is not something that I will talk about here, but I just wanted to point it out because there's a variety of efforts that we can't cover it all today. And then lastly, we visualized the data and we published the findings on our website in early August. So if you're interested in learning more, because I'm not obviously going to be going through everything, please visit our website. Everything from the visualizations, we also have an interactive map, is on there. Okay, so how far have we come since 2021? Well, the first thing that we wanted to understand was what kind of emphasis was given to different histories in the official designation reports of landmarks. Just a caveat, the categories that you see here are not adopted by LPC. These are just internally the ones that we decided on to mark designation based on what was at the forefront of the statements of significance of each landmark. So that means that just because a site at some point on page 26 of the designation report mentions jazz does not count as cultural, because that's not the main reason why it was designated, just so that I make it clear. And you can see here on the screen that there has been an overall increase in designation that are not purely aesthetics, which points to the diversification claimed by LPC in theory. Next. This was not enough still for us, so after those broad categories, we wanted to look more closely into where underrepresented histories were the most important factor behind designation and keep track of those. So those are the 16 that we identified. I don't know if you can see, we can always go back to this slide later if we want to talk about specific examples. And we found that between 2021 and 2024, 16 out of the 34 designated landmarks, are nearly half, were tied to underrepresented communities. This is a substantial increase compared to the period from 2014 to 2020, where only 20 out of the 123 designations, or only 16%, fell into that category. The clearest focus of recent designation has been tied to African American history, particularly in and around Harlem, with 7 out of the 16 sites identified tied to underrepresented communities being linked to African American heritage. However, by contrast, other groups remain almost invisible, with in the past decade only 1 site tied to indigenous history, one site tied to Chinese American history, and 3 tied to Latinx and heritage. There is, however, a big also caveat to those numbers, which is that the overall number of designations has declined sharply overall. There's this really great report that came out from Village Preservation last year, I believe in September. Hi Carrie, this is Carrie, our this really great report that came out that looked at overall rates of designation and saw that the Adams administration had the lowest rate of designations on record. So even if we're talking about percentages, rates, it's really important to keep in mind that in general there just have not been designations happening overall. Next.
Actually, I just wanted to point out that the building where Dizzy Gillespie lived or owned was initially presented for designation to LPC, and LPC had no interest in it. It was of no architectural interest or merit. And so the second time, what was interesting is they paid attention to the fact that, of Dizzy Gillespie's, connection to it. So, I mean, that is an indication at least that, something changed in terms of being willing to consider that as being something significant, even though the building, they said, is a nondescript building architecturally. And next to that, Cecil Hotel, where Minton's, playhouse, and where, Bebop was born. I think Miles Davis said after he went there, he dropped out of Juilliard because they had nothing to teach him. But that building was on the National Register long before it was a city landmark. And a building that's not here because, we voted on it is the Duke Ellington building, which I think was on the National Register for 50 years before it was designated by the city as a landmark.
And it's in very good shape.
And it's in very good shape. And in addition to Duke Ellington living there, Noble Sissle, who, with his partner, U.B. Blake, I think wrote the first African-American musical, also lived in the building. Never mind.
No, that's great. So zooming out to look kind of how distributed designations have been, it's really clear that Manhattan continues to dominate, but there have been important shifts. You can see on those graphs that the Bronx accounted for only 1% of new landmarks before 2021, which is abysmal. And it went up to 20% after 2021. So this is definitely progress towards a more balanced distribution of preservation efforts across the city. I don't know if you want to stop and look at it, but okay.
Oh, you wanna go back?
No, it's good. But I was also really interested in looking at what's happening at a more granular level, so what's happening within Manhattan. So since 2021, most designations have been concentrated in upper and lower Manhattan, which is a big shift from previous years. And by Upper Manhattan, I refer to CB 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, just so that you know the definition that I'm using. I'll go into detail in a couple of slides to talk about CB12 specifically, but for now, we can see that there are efforts to better distribute designations. And one thing that is interesting is that nearly all of these designations have been individual landmarks. There's only one historic district that has been designated, which is the Dorrance Works Historic District in Harlem, that I've been told CB12 also supported at the time. And what really stands out from this data is that while the commission is recognizing more culturally significant places, it is doing so through isolated buildings rather than protecting broader community landscapes. Right, so before we look at more designations, I was also really curious, because I'm not from this community board, to quickly give an overview of all the landmarks currently within CB12's boundaries. So in total, you have 23 individual landmarks and 4 historic districts spread out mostly in the southern half, some in the north, and there's a noticeable gap in the middle, closer to the 180s, the Little Dominican Republic and Fort George. And while I go into a bit more details regarding these landmarks, I just want you to always have in the background this question of what stories and sites are being represented and what is currently being left out. Yeah. So in those 23 individual landmarks, something that really stood out to me is that nearly a third are lampposts. Historic lampposts.
The old timey
Yeah.
And
Gresham Street and Broadway.
I was really struck by that. So almost a third of them are lampposts, and only a small handful represent community or cultural spaces. The rest are mostly residential, religious, civic buildings, along with 3 bridges and 1 lighthouse. So this really shows that preservation in this district has leaned towards more infrastructure and architecture rather than places tied to lived experience. And from an equity standpoint, there's a clear room to broaden what gets recognized here so that the portfolio better reflects the people and the culture of Washington Heights and Inwood. So the historic districts on that front, very small districts, clustered pockets almost, that are focused on aesthetics in all of their reports. Most recent was the designation of the Park Terrace West Historic District in November 2018. And from my understanding, it's not just that there have been contentions around designation, but also around the drawing of boundaries around what gets included in the districts as well. And this really shows that calls for inclusion by the community have also remained unsuccessful here. And so with this context in mind, let's look more closely at the introduction of the equity framework and how it's impacted CB12. So someone already said before it hasn't, and you were right. You can see on the slide that it's very minimal, only 2 new sites that were designated, both of them individual landmarks. So next. The first site is the Holy Road, okay, hopefully I pronounced that right. Episcopal Church on 179th Street that was designated in 2021 to described in the designation report as a social and religious anchor for the Latin community. It was supported by CB12 at the time as well. Then the second site is the building that Wayne mentioned, 935 St. Nicholas Avenue. It's aesthetic and cultural because of Duke Ellington and Noble Sissel, also supported by CB12 at the time. And while they are both tied to social cultural themes, they also reveal some gaps and stands in contrast to other neighborhoods like Harlem that have seen a notable increase in designations tied to African American heritage. This is great progress, but also highlights that CB12 has not experienced the same gains despite existing advocacy efforts. This is even more so striking given CB12's deep cultural record, shaped by immigrant communities, Afro-Dominican culture, working class traditions, and activism. And there's also this argument presented by LBC at times, which is that certain building types are already represented elsewhere, so that's why it shouldn't be represented in another district.
And not the best example
And
of
not
the
necessarily, yes.
yeah, and very typology.
And it still erases the uniquely situated social cultural histories of these sites, regardless of the typology.
And what's interesting about this designation is when you look at the designation and the modification of the designation for Sugar Hill, it stops where CB9 stops. And one of the discussion, it always says it stops at 155th Street. But in the discussion of Sugar Hill and the notable people, they mentioned Duke Ellington, they mentioned Paul Robeson and others, and Duke Ellington clearly lived north of 150th, and Paul Robeson basically would be touching Jamel. And the question is, why doesn't the Sugar Hill Historic District extend north of 155th Street if you're going to say that these people lived in Sugar Hill?
Right.
Is that big pink thing?
No,
No,
No, that's
What-
not Sugar
what-
Hill.
No.
what is the
That's not
big
Sugar
pink
Hill
thing?
South.
Oh, but what's that?
that's a park.
It's a park.
Aren't all parks pink?
Well,
No,
what's the
so
parks that aren't?
pink are
Parks all over.
individual landmarks and blue are the historic districts.
I have a quick question before you go any further. Is Fort Tryon Park considered a landmark through you guys, right?
Not through
But
them.
enough
in
for
the eyes-
us,
in the eyes
but
of
it is
them.
considered
The whole
okay.
thing?
No.
Yeah, some,
I don't believe it's totally.
it's a,
It's the close, yeah, it's a scenic landmark and then the cloisters are individual landmarks.
okay, cool, just wanted to see, that's all.
Usually when we talk about designations, scenic landmarks, because there's so few of them, we tend to kind of treat them separately. Like Van Cortlandt is a scenic landmark, Fort Tryon is a scenic landmark, but for this particular thing, equity framework doesn't really apply to the scenic landmarks, so we don't really talk about that. Okay, so kind of like a recap, what's currently missing from our analysis. So CB12 has historically seen some of the lowest designation rates in Manhattan, and the introduction of the equity framework has not changed that reality. Community priorities seem to rarely translate into LPC action, leaving important sites unrecognized and unprotected. Architectural aesthetics are still prioritized over cultural meaning, despite some improvements. And some categories that we can think about include cultural institutions like churches, theaters, community centers, then housing developments like early Mitchell-Lama complexes that shape neighborhood identity, and lastly, small businesses and gathering places that contribute to cultural vitality. Lastly, limited communication and feedback from LBC ends up weakening trust with the community and can discourage grassroots preservation work. For example, if you look at requests for evaluations, when they're submitted, there's rarely any follow-up work that's being done or any attempt to redirect the sites when they don't meet formal criteria for designations, right?
We have a lot of experience with
Yeah,
this.
so it points to a few opportunities that could be meaningful. One issue that stands out, as I mentioned, was the lack of clarity in how LBC responds to the RFPs. And our review shows that this is not just a challenge here, it's a citywide challenge, and CB12 has already raised concerns about it. So continued pressure for clearer explanations of why certain sites move forward and others do not would help to address this gap. We also found that designations are not consistently tracked or monitored in ways that allow for community to follow up. So building on the board's existing land use tracking, extending that practice to RFPs and preservation could create a powerful record of how LBC is not acting or not on community input. Another theme is the way that limited staff capacity at LBC can stall designations, and this is why partnerships matter. So by collaborating with researchers and advocacy organizations to provide documentation, communities can help ensure that important sites do not fall through the cracks. And because the board already plays such a central role in land use review, we also kind of suggest that there is a stronger link between development and preservation, so that would make a difference. Because preservation priorities can be elevated in the same conversations as rezonings and planning proposals, tying them directly to the district's broader vision for growth. And finally, the research also points to the value of revisiting some existing landmarks, especially for sites that are designated but whose designation reports did not reflect cultural or community significance. I don't think this is the biggest priority in CB12, but I still wanted to put it out there because it's not about challenging existing reports, but more about adding new histories, because a lot of the times some layers have been completely omitted, but that could help advance the goals of the equity framework. Yeah. So now I just wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the advocacy work that MS is doing, since Carrie joined us. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what MS is
My name's
doing.
Carrie, I'm the president of MAS, recently appointed. Sorry, I had another meeting, so I'm running a little late. But I made it all the way up here from Brooklyn. And it's nice to meet you all, and glad we could share some of our research. And so this was the kind of research that Charlotte was able to explain today coming out of our Enduring Culture initiative, and we are working to expand ideas around what preservation means and how we can preserve more of what makes our communities unique, a little bit beyond just architectural integrity, and there's, which is important, but let's think sort of more broadly about how we make our neighborhoods more resilient to, we know we need growth, and we know that we need housing and these things, but how do we kind of maintain what makes our communities unique while allow for that growth and development. so, yeah, and we're so happy to have Charlotte with us as our Enduring Culture Fellow.
So yeah, the Enduring Culture Initiative, there's another fellow also that works more on the community partnership front. I'm mostly focused on the research, so that makes me have a different task. This is kind of a rough timeline of what we're looking at in terms of what Enduring Culture does. The star is where we're at now. We're really deep into an NYC focused research process to help develop policy proposals right now. And over the summer, we actually selected 7 community partners across the city to financially support their place-based initiatives. So we're very excited to have a more direct contact with on-the-ground work. And this is really what we were trying to achieve with this.
Yeah, it's great. We did get a grant that allowed us to do some re-granting, and for MAS being a citywide organization, I think it's really important to have contacts with people who are like you, who are on the ground working in communities to help us make sure that advocacy that we're doing actually meets the needs of New Yorkers at a broad scale. Any organizations or
We have to change that.
No, next round. But yeah, and then, so next slide. And then another project that we wanted to bring up is very much in progress, so this is very early stages, but we still wanted to bring it up here so that we can have more contacts later on. So our planning team has started new work looking at how waterfront access is shaped by zoning and the way that publicly owned parcels are used. We know that waterfront access across the city is not developed the same way, and that has real implications for equity and public benefits. So this research is about understanding where delays and barriers to development or access occur, and what kinds of policies and practices might make those spaces more accessible, more equitable, and more beneficial to surrounding communities.
So before the meeting was called to order, we were discussing a project in Inwood where the proposal for the waterfront was not received well by the community because it was too hard a surface. And since the time I've been on the community board, which I think is 2003, there have been proposals in the Sherman Creek area, Inwood, to make the waterfront accessible once again to the public, to create, sort of a continuous, parkland. There are developments that have waterfront design as part of that, because of where they're located, and the necessity to consider, flood mitigation. But I think if MAS is looking at waterfront research, there are a number of committees on Community Board 12 that would be glad to speak to you, because Parks and Culture is looking at that, but also traffic and transportation, and quite frankly, land use, but also housing and human services, because many of the new developments that are going up based on the Inwood rezoning, but also based upon some land swaps where like the city and Con Ed, consolidated properties so that there's, something can be done, it's on the waterfront. And the intention is for there to be, public access, but the nature and quality of that public space of the water is what is then the next step.
And we'd love to actually connect the appropriate people to our planning team to have a conversation.
I gave Lane's email to
Okay,
today, yeah.
But I would say if you kind of outline, what you're looking at, as I said, I can also get you in touch with the other committee chairs so they can invite you to talk about it as well.
And then it's great that, sorry.
I was just gonna ask whether you're looking at the history of what the waterfront use was up here before, or is that's not part of it?
I don't know how far they're going back.
I think they're basically looking at, what they did was start with, I think, 5 different rezonings that happen along the water, with waterfront access and city-owned property.
Mhm.
And I believe that Inwood is one of them.
Yeah, that's the
That, and kind of how, like over the course of 20 years, what was promised, what was delivered, what's the holdup? Because we've seen a lot of places where, like 20 years ago, there was a park promised in the site, and it's still
there.
empty and why, like maybe it's contaminated, I don't know, like there are
Right.
like different issues that maybe came up, like what's the hold of it, how, and it's not just about like gotcha, we, blaming the city, but like how can we do better moving forward? When the city's making promises as they come to communities that have these neighborhood plans, well, like, how can we trust you if you didn't deliver on these other, and I realize it's a different mayoral administration, but like we need some consistency, so I think they're really sort of looking at like the last 10 to 20 years, and basically like what was promised, what was delivered, and how can we do better.
Great.
Yeah.
Next.
So it's great that we're having this.
Is that the last one?
No, there should be two other ones.
Okay, well. There we
yeah.
go.
So we were talking about Inwood and rezoning, so that's definitely one of the, here it is. So it's one of the case studies that the planning team is looking at. They did a recent site visit actually where they looked at the conditions along the Harlem Riverside because of the vision that was put forward by the Manhattan Greenway plan, and it's still very incomplete. So what they saw was,
Sorry.
pocket ends and sliver parks that did not yet connect into a true continuous greenway. And this case study is really meant to inform recommendations on what steps are needed to close those gaps and make the waterfront more accessible. It also looks ahead to the strategies that a new administration, like Carrie mentioned, could use to ensure that waterfront development happens more evenly across the boroughs. And as I mentioned, the research is still in very early phase, but the planning team wanted to share it here so that you know that it's happening and that hopefully they can return to share more detailed findings later on, either this committee or another committee. And then the last slide is just a question for everyone. The district has a really rich stories that deserve recognition, and there's really an opportunity now to make sure that they're not left out of the official record. So then the question is to you, what should future generations know and remember? So, thank you for listening to our presentation today.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. So,
Yeah.
do we have questions, comments from the committee or from anyone online for our colleagues here from the Municipal Art Society?
That was a pretty intensive presentation. I don't have any questions right now.
I have a question. I'm sorry, you want?
I was just gonna ask whether you did have a record about existing historic districts that where you applied to expand the district and whether any of those were ever delivered.
That's not something that I looked at. I think I tried to also reduce the scope because you could just look into everything. One of the initial idea that we had was look at sites that were recommended for designation but were ultimately denied, but we found that because, and that's again going back to transparency, right? LBC does not publish those. So
Right.
it's nearly impossible. It's only the sites that were picked up by media that you could actually know. So we can move on those ideas.
Right.
So the same thing with historic district, it's not really something that we looked into, but that could be a really interesting research project, definitely.
And I see Daniel, but just to follow up on Vivian's point, we have some background information and some of our community colleagues have background information on RFEs that went to LBC to expand Audubon Park Historic District, and the responses that they received, responses that suggested how to restructure the request, and after it was restructured, that person was gone, and LPC then said, well, they were no longer interested in doing it that way, so there's probably some information, while it may not be public, that we could share with you that shows how in some cases, a pretty well-researched requests were sent and how quickly LPC basically indicated they were not interested, or the reasons given for not moving forward when we checked with, other landmarks experts in the city, they would say, but landmarks did exactly what they say they can't do on the Upper West Side or in Brooklyn Heights. So why can't they do it in Washington Heights? Daniel.
I just wanted to mention, by any chance, what is the HCC, like, were they able to the survey that we have out,
HDC.
right? Were they able to like share also that information that we've been collecting to them as well too?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
they were not, I don't think they were asked to do that. We can certainly share it since it's our information.
Yeah. And
We work with HTC.
yeah, because like we have like this like survey, this ongoing survey, just like people in the neighborhood, proposing like places that there are like cultural, background history and all that stuff. I don't know, I find it like extremely interesting, and I also wonder too if like what other research have got done like other places that like been proposed in the past. Like, at some point, I ended up finding out that there was like a group like looking to preserve Inwood Hills Park. And, that's like the last standing untouched land of like Manhattan here. Also, like let's say like the Seaman Drake Arch. That's like yeah, it's like such a beautiful thing, but it's just like kind of like covered with like all these other buildings, and it would be great if it would be somewhat preserved and all that stuff. And even like there's like someone told me that there's a tombstone looking thing across the street from one of the lampposts, that it was the 13th mile for Kingsbridge Road, that it led from all the way from South Ferry all the way north.
A mile marker.
Yeah, mile
To
marker.
the entrance to Inwood Park, just north of Ashland.
Yeah, and it's just like it's just like a tombstone looking thing, brown.
is.
Yeah. and
Jim
it's-
Berlin and I looked at that many years ago.
Yeah, so
I was there when they put it in.
He was the mason. Ann?
Sure. What, I don't know if this is an appropriate question for this venue, but does anyone know what the status of the Underground Railroad building on Riverside Drive was?
That's another RFE that LPC had no interest in.
It's dead?
A week before they announced the equity,
Interesting.
framework. Yeah,
So it's dead?
for now.
For now.
Yes. But it has not been ripped down for now.
No, I know.
But that's an interesting example where the primary reason or primary stated reason is that it has been physically altered. And one of my neighbors used to refer to it as the Staten Island building, because it's kind of a building, but
Yeah.
they sort of applied sort of fake stone, over the original facade. And if you go to the building, you can see where the applied facade is separating, and underneath that is the original facade.
Yeah.
So, I mean, architecturally, you can claim that if you remove what was added, the original fabric is there, and of course, the porches are gone because they built stuff on either side, and I think there was a cupola. But they were not arguing the significance of the building because of its architecture, they were arguing the significance of the building because of its connection to not one but two abolitionists, and its likely connection as being, a site in the Underground Railroad.
Right.
And so, but
Well,
LPC was-
wasn't another factor that there was no documentation?
there's never
It's like the
documentation of the Underground Railroad.
Yes and no, because the guy had created the same model before on Duane Street, which was to put up a sugar plant, to have a wharf, to have the same Jenny Lind steamboat. And he was then caught hiding a fugitive slave, and then what does he do? He moves uptown, he gets the Jenny Lind up here, he has a wharf, he builds a sugar plant, but he never lived in the house, owned it. That was one of the things. And he also had a stairway, and the front of the house in those days faced the river, which makes total sense if you try to get people out of there. So that was one of their many reasons why they wouldn't consider it.
And I think also, that research came to us from neighborhood residents who, I think in the space of a month or so, pull it up. But interestingly enough, when you mentioned one of the things that often is of issue is the boundaries. So when Audubon Park was being considered, LPC asked us, to make our recommendations where the boundary should be, and we suggested, and I still have the color-coded map of somewhat broader boundaries, which would have included both the row houses on 158th Street, which are older than the apartment buildings that were included, by the way, as well as, you know, the 857. So had they gone along with that, all of that would be in Audubon Park. But interestingly, where 857 is located, apparently that was like a little cluster, uptown cluster of abolitionists. You know, which I think prior research, I think only referred to like Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn,
Right.
nothing uptown. But a point is,
The two churches on Amsterdam Avenue.
LPC never, you know, from 2009, when we suggested they do that, until, you know, 8 to 10 years later, never looked into it. So had they done that, the little bit of research that neighborhood residents were able to uncover could have been expanded dramatically, and some of the questions they have could have been answered.
If they ever came north, it's far.
The thing with LPC is that they do conduct surveys and have research, we just don't know about it. You know, they have this internal database that they always refer back to, but we don't
It's
know
not
about
public
it. It's not
information.
public information, so we wouldn't know what they're doing, really, so that's a huge issue that we also ran into for the research, because so much of it is just not.
Is there any way to advocate to make that public?
Someone suggested do a FOIL request
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you
Oh.
can certainly do a FOIL request, it might take you 6 months
Forever.
to get anything.
Yeah.
Hey, 6 months, that's long. 6 months better than nothing, right?
You might as well do it.
Are there,
We'll probably not publish it because then it'll be the
Yeah.
deliberative process of the agency.
But in terms of the argument for this, I'm sure you know about 227 Duffield in Brooklyn,
Right,
so like.
and that was that, and the different, and that was not a nice building, but it was the mayor's wife who was attached to it, and we were up at the same
Yeah.
time, and it was like, wait a minute.
The city bought
what's
that
the-
building.
Yeah, and
Which
made it
is,
far.
and they're spending like millions of dollars to stabilize it, because it's about to fall down, but yeah.
It's who you know.
Yeah, true.
Ethan?
Yeah, sure. I was just wondering when MAS, so first of all, are they determining specific sites and districts in neighborhoods? Are they prioritizing which ones do they want to advocate for first? And how do they speak to community residents to determine what their priorities are in terms of preservation?
You.
Meaning
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
oh, okay, okay.
MAS, oh.
As the organization,
So you're talking about if, does MAS?
yeah. Does that,
Oh. I mean, MAS, sorry, I thought you were talking about landmarks.
No,
Sorry,
sorry, no.
I was like, I don't.
No, so when you're, cause you wanna advocate to LPC, right? So,
Yeah,
when you're determining what historic districts you wanna see and sites you wanna see, so how much, are you speaking of community members in terms of
yeah,
that kind of
so
role?
typically MAS, I guess recently, we're not coming up with like, we're not going to landmarks and saying you should landmark this building or this site. We're really thinking about things from like a systemic level and like how decisions are made and policies are made to advance inclusion and equity sort of at a broad scale. So we do sometimes when people reach out to us and say, hey, we're advocating for this, and we evaluate it and say, okay, does it fit within like, what we support? And then we might just add our name to a letter or like sign our, like, so, the school number 4, which was, School for Black Kids, we signed on that letter and we supported that. So we'll support things, but we're not actively like locating buildings or districts ourselves. We really rely on other people coming to us to say this is what we think should happen in our neighborhood. I don't think it would be appropriate for us to like come into people's neighborhoods and say, this site should be.
This is a really nice house.
This is a great building.
But to the question that Daniel asked even, there's an organization called the Historic Districts Council,
Yes.
of which I'm actually on the board of advisors, but HDC and CB12 work together on putting out a survey asking just folks who live in the neighborhood, what do you want to see designated either as individual landmarks or historic districts? And, it's an ongoing thing, and I think, last fall, maybe the beginning of this year, we had the group with the largest respondents who come and do a sort of a presentation to us, and they're looking at doing I think it's a Fort Washington district. And so they then hooked up with HDC under a program called Six to Celebrate, where HDC provides the local groups with support to help them flesh out their designation reports. So this is the kind of thing where, like, we as the community board, working with our community members, would be the one identifying the sites, and organizations like Municipal Art Society and HDC would help us to move forward.
So an interesting little sort of historical fact is that the Historic Districts Council was founded, like it originally kind of the seed of that organization started at MAS. So we have a long history with HDC. Frampton is on our preservation committee. I know him well. We totally support what they do, and would love opportunities to collaborate with them. Work with them on environment district advocacy recently and in the past. So I think they're doing great work, and we should find ways to collaborate with them even more.
And kind of build up kind of your question, and what we're doing, I mentioned the Enduring Culture Initiative a bit earlier. What we're doing is really looking more at the policy level and kind of the structural issues that we can advocate on, so we're not, this equity framework research was something that I was doing when I was an intern, and this is great because now we can present it to communities, but what we're looking at really is a larger scale of advocacy.
I think there's ways that it kind of fits together.
Yeah, definitely.
Work on the ground has to kind of relate to work at the citywide level. I think that it's part of the whole puzzle.
How do you intend to provide this feedback to LPC? How does LPC get MAS's, input on, what?
Well, we did publish our findings and we shared it with LPC. We didn't get any response at all. I'm sure they were, and just a little bit background too, I used to work in city government for 16 years, so I know landmark staff, I worked with them pretty closely, so they didn't respond to so I'm sure it's fine. But I think that it's, our next, we're still working on kind of how we, what we want to focus in on in terms of advocacy, but I think it's a good role for outside organizations to continue to push city agencies. I mean, when I worked in a city agency, it's on one hand, the outside civic advocacy organizations are a little bit of a pain in your butt, frankly, but it's also useful because they're advocating for things that internally you can't really push for because of politics. And so I think it can be useful to have us continuing to kind of push those buttons.
Is anyone asking the mayoral candidates where they stand on preservation?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We have, we are working on a questionnaire on preservation with a sort of group of preservation organizations, including HDCE, that we're going to send around to candidates. So that's should be out soon.
And I think HDC held a mayoral forum.
We were part of that.
Okay.
That was a right? We had a virtual mayoral forum before the primary.
Okay.
So there are questions. I mean, I think it's not, honestly, it's not the most, it's not the most pressing issue for a lot of people. So people are more well, what are you gonna do for housing and are you gonna pay the rent and that kind of thing. But I think, it's still part of an important conversation.
It's may not be the most pressing issue on the surface, but in a recent HDC meeting, there was a discussion, and either one of the current borough presidents or someone in the running made it clear that they absolutely do not support any further designations in their borough.
Oh.
I believe,
Do you remember?
I believe that might have been
Staten
Brooklyn.
Island.
No.
Probably not Staten
I
Island.
believe it was in Brooklyn, but someone should check. And so the extent to which you have a candidate who was saying, because we often speculate that, this mayoral administration or that mayoral administration has a policy or an unstated policy that, no designations, in Upper Manhattan, because they want to focus on, development. And that was our sense for a long period of time under de Blasio and continuing under, Adams. But if you have a candidate who specifically says on the campaign trail that,
Yeah, that's
they don't want to see
surprising.
any more, then it may be an issue if you have any interest at all in any preservation
Right,
ever
right.
while they're in office. Anyway, I think this, for me, this update was great. Lots of food for thought, but I think there's also opportunities for CB12, various committees to, partner with the Municipal Art Society on a number of things. I think this is great. If there are no further questions or comments, I will allow you to get to wherever you have to go.
Thank you so much for
Thank
having us.
Thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you.
We will stay in touch through our further research.
Yes.
I'll grab some of this.
Is there any old business? Is there any new, but anything you'd like to share with us, Martin?
Yes, just a couple of updates which followed up on the emails I sent to Catherine and you last night and just this past week. On Broadway between 216th and 218th Street on the west side, you have the demolition permits and work that will be taking place at 5073 Broadway, former Isabella Nursing Services location, which was sold to a private developer. So DEP and DOP have permits up from both agencies to demo that building. We don't know as yet what they'll do, but I speculate, given what's been going on adjacent to it, we will probably see another 11-story apartment building. Just north of that, 5089 and 5099 Broadway, which is the former Twin Donut, adjacent to it, the used car lot. Those were granted permits by the buildings department for a new 11-story, 83-unit apartment building. And we expect to hear lots of jackhammering and noise very, very soon, along with the demo of 5073 Broadway. 5055 Broadway, which is at 216th Street also, right there as you approach it. That building is complete, and they've begun to rent out the units in that 11-story building there. So lots of activity, new buildings coming for them, perhaps in the months ahead from 216th to 218th Street on the west side.
Yeah, well, we certainly need the new residential structures, but the question is, how well are they designed?
Yes.
What's the, sort of the layout of units, and what's the affordability level?
Correct.
Which is, critical. When I say it's needed, one of the things that we pointed out, in terms of the age of the existing buildings makes it such that most of them are not handicap accessible. They either don't have elevators or they have stairs coming in, so any new building would have to comply with ADA. So the entrance would be accessible, all the public spaces, the apartments would have to be accessible. So we do need that because we have there are certain census tracts that are, is it a NARC, naturally occurring retirement community?
Yes, yeah.
So people are just aging in place, but they're aging in place in buildings that if you have any mobility issues are not really ideal.
Lastly, further east, 3880 9th Avenue, which is the northwest corner of 207th Street, former gas station site. The Affordable Housing Lottery has opened as that building is.
Why is everything 11 stories? Not everything.
Well,
Like 3 in a
that's,
row.
they were gonna do 18, then about 50 of us showed up to a meeting at the Campbell Sports Center during a general meeting of Community Board 12, Campbell in 2016, and implored EDC to build to a less denser height than 18 stories. They agreed to either one.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, your building is much taller in reality than an 11-story building, although in terms of actual floors, it's not.
It's a 13-story building that they claim is a 12-story.
Right, but what's, the floor to ceiling heights in the newer buildings is less. So I think there's on 161st Street in the mid-block, there's a new building that was put up, it's not new anymore. But, you know, the buildings that are this side are technically 5 or 6 stories, and I think that's an 8-story building. But it looks visually to be maybe 2 stories taller, because the older buildings have, you know, much taller ceilings. But that's an interesting point, because one of the developments that is now much taller, when it was originally presented to CB12, and I happened to sit in on that, Housing and Human Services, the original building was, I think, 10 or 11 stories. And the committee was fine with that. And then when it came back later, it was almost double the size. And we were asking what happened, and, you know, the developer was encouraged by HPD and City Hall to like maximize. So in some cases, it's not necessarily the developer saying, let's build 18 stories. The conversations they're having downtown, which is the reason why there's another reso that I will share with you. The community board, you know, initially coming through the land use committee, with a set of design guidelines that we recommended for new developments. Because by the time projects come before the committee, everything's almost baked in the cake. And we said if the elected officials and the city agencies are gonna be at the table, sort of discussing the projects that are being shaped, these are the things we'd like them to advocate for, as opposed to just maxing out. You know, we know that there is a need for, you know, housing, but, you know, looking at the density of new development around the 207th Street station, you just gotta wonder what that subway elevated is gonna be like once those buildings are fully occupied, because there are no improvements planned for the station.
No, zero. And across the way, the Fordham Landing, from University Heights Bridge south to Clemente State Park, if you think the buildings like the one at 208th and 9th Avenue is tall, you gotta take a look at what is planned for Fordham Landing. We're looking at 40 stories. So imagine what the area is gonna look like on both sides of the Harlem River, north of Sherman Creek Park, north of Roberto Clemente State Park up to the University Heights Bridge. And this pressure, and I agree 100% with Wayne, both the bandwidth, the number 1 train at 207th Street, those platforms will not be able to handle it. You're gonna have to increase Metro North service to get people to the University Heights Station, which is accessible downtown to get there in 15 minutes to that center. And it's gonna have to be, I would hope that as they build out that Molly Cone along the area from 201 on the Harlem River, the west side of the Harlem River, from the bridge down to Academy Street, that they would look possibly at putting some ferry service.
Yeah, we need a ferry. Great. We need a ferry.
Because the pressure is going to be profound on transit.
And
Can I just go back to what you said about design guidelines? How enforceable are they, and, you know?
well, I mean, the community board, any community board plays sort of a role of making recommendations. So you know, anything that we passed is a recommendation.
Right.
So what we were saying to our borough president and to our city council people is they have the ability to make some of these things enforceable. So we were asking them to pay attention to what we were outlining as concerns for new development, and as they are at the table with the developers, to make sure that, you know, they are bringing it into the conversation.
Got it, thank you.
Jim, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to, I mean, obviously, there should be work on the one train station, but on the other hand, part of the trick would just be to drastically increase the number of trains that come by and keep on pulling people off of
Good
the
point, Jim.
platform.
I gotta tell you, the number 1 train moves every 5 minutes back and forth.
Well, they can, actually, with
Maybe
the
they
new
can expedite.
signaling they're doing, they can do better than that.
There are a lot of delays on the number 1 train.
You know, what I was gonna say is all these buildings are all rentals, correct? Is it, like, has there been any concern about the fact that there are no buildings that are being built for ownership? Like,
Oh, that came up a decade
yeah,
ago.
because I just, like my old neighborhood before I moved here 6 years ago, like there were a lot of buildings being built, like Forest Queens and just those surrounding areas, and there were definitely, like, there was a mix of rentals and then condos or co-ops that were, it just seems to me like we're gonna be a neighborhood of renters and, you know, being a renter, you're kind of like at the mercy of your landlord if they raise the rent. Like it seems like Inwood is not gonna have like the community feeling that it has now. You're gonna have people moving after a year or two, so.
Melissa, that's exactly, that was one of the things that a lot of us talked about, was having some vestige of home ownership in the rezoning portfolio. Sadly, did not happen.
Well, I mean, but the zoning doesn't dictate home ownership. It's the development projects as they move forward, and I believe the RFP that HPD had out last year for that, was it the 9th Avenue site? There was, you know, a survey of what people were asking for, and one of the things that came up was interest in home ownership. So I don't know how that project is advancing, but it did come up, and I would say that interest in ensuring that development addresses both the needs of renters and homeowners is something that you should feel free to share with your fellow committee members who are in Housing and Human Services.
I mean, in the 93 points of agreement on the Inwood rezoning that were enacted by the city, one of them was the restoration of 2 buildings that the board advocated for, 2110 Amsterdam, which wasn't in the rezoning, but 21 Arden Street became an HDFC co-op. So those people who returned to that building, which was left abandoned by the city-owned HPD, that was restored and is an HDFC co-op. And everybody, almost everybody who lived there before they were relocated, moved back in.
Right, but my point is, as, you know, the Inwood rezoning, you know, facilitated the ability to build new buildings, so as those new buildings go up, HPD, EDC, whomever's involved, need to understand that, you know, there is interest in having some of those new units be homeownership units, whether they are limited equity co-ops or, you know, some version of a Chalama or affordable condos. I mean, the city has done a wide variety of affordable homeownership models throughout the 5 boroughs, so this is nothing new. We just need to see that played out in Washington Heights and Inwood.
In next month's meeting with EDC, rezoning, if you might ask, what is the status of development plans, if any, for the former NYPD tow pound on the south side of 203rd Street between 9th Avenue and the Harlem River?
Was that one of the points in the letter, or was that an additional site?
That was part of the rezoning.
Okay, well, yeah,
Yeah, and it's city-owned property, it was owned by NYPD, and now it's sitting there vacant. What are they doing with it? What's the plan? Could that be an opportunity for some vestige of home ownership?
well, you know what's interesting, and I don't want to belabor this, but our board chair, on a couple of occasions, have asked all of the committee chairs to look at the points of agreement and to come back with, you know, questions to pose to EDC as the point, because actually EDC, not city planning, ran that rezoning,
Yeah.
so that EDC could then pull in the proper city agencies. And I must say that the only questions that I've seen are the questions that have been generated from land use. So I'm sure that, you know, Housing and Human Services and Parks and Culture, you know, are interested in the status of those points of agreement, but there've been no questions that have come to the forefront, which is why at the update for next month, we've simply asked, you know, EDC and the city partners to, you know, be as comprehensive as they can. And what Daniel pointed out months ago is going through many of the parks commitments, they're done. And it's like, well, you should be tooting your horn then. You should be saying, we made these commitments and they're done. And if there are other commitments that have been made and are in progress, or there's a plan for that, let us know that too.
And lastly, on the identified Con Ed lots that were buildable, what's the status of those?
Any,
I was gonna say, while, I was gonna ask, like, while we're closing out, was DCP?
well, I asked if there's anything they haven't asked.
Okay,
The question was, does city planning have anything they want to share?
Hi everyone.
Hello.
Good to see everyone, and hope you had a great summer.
Wait, we have to adjust the volume.
Oh, sorry.
Making it go lower.
It's actually not doing anything.
Is it on the laptop?
Sounds like it
Is this better?
Getting there.
Okay,
Flip.
try it again.
Hi everyone. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Great to see everyone, and I hope you had a fantastic summer. Right now, I have no updates to share, except potentially we may be getting an update on the Manhattan Plan. Internally, we have not received an update, but we were told that some more information would be coming this fall. I believe you're the first land use committee to have a meeting in September, being the first week of the month. So I anticipate having more information sometime this month, and we'll be happy to share what I know at the next meeting in October, if that works for you all.
Okay, and for the new committee members, I will share with you the presentation on the Manhattan Plan so that you know we're not planning to do a nuclear device in the community.
Unless we land.
Unless we land on it. Anything else?
I think just since we're rolling in next month's meeting with EDC, we should maybe devote like 5 minutes of that meeting to talk about our one capital, one expense budget priority, which is the same every year, right? So then we can, like, yes, we did this.
Yeah, we need to work on that as well. Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
So it is 8:33. We are adjourned. Thank you all, and for the new members,
It's great to have
you survived your first meeting.
Fire hose.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care all.